This morning, we're going to have a meditation later in the program, so I'm going to skip our usual starting off meditation and dive right into it. And what I want to do is begin by reading a question by Ellie, and I see Ellie is here with us this morning, that she sent in, and then I'm going to try to answer the question by talking about the practice of inquiry. Which is a complement to the practice of loving kindness, which Mary Song talked about so eloquently last Sunday. So hopefully you'll get the sort of both wings of the spiritual bird. It's often said that the spiritual bird needs two wings to fly. One is seeking truth, that's the path of inquiry, and one is cultivating love and compassion. So let me just plunge in with Ellie's question. And Ellie wrote this by hand and I copied into my notes. So I hope I got it right. Ellie, if I didn't, you can raise your hand and speak up. So here it is. If there is no self, but still life, is it possible to equate life with selflessness and escape ego? That sounds like a contradiction in terms, I guess. I'm not quite sure why she said that, but she goes on to give an example of what she's talking about. Show us life and selflessness coexist, and then I ask, who am I? And I say, life. What's wrong with that? I'm still not enlightened. Is that, does that accurately reflect your question, Ellie? You're not objecting, so I'll assume it does. We'll go on. So, in any case, this question is an example, a little example of inquiry, how inquiry works. It begins with asking a question, like Ellie's question, who am I? And then it uses the intellect to make a little analysis, see how far that will take you. So, how much that might clarify things. So then she says, okay, she has an analysis of the relationship between life and ego and selflessness. But the thing about spiritual inquiry does not end in an intellectual understanding, in any kind of philosophical statement or logical statement. It bypasses the intellect ultimately. It leaves it behind and it jumps off and it ends in realization, gnosis, enlightenment, something that is beyond the intellect. So we always have to keep that in mind. And here's what Rumi says about this, the great 13th century Sufi poet. Understanding is good and useful for just long enough to bring you to the king's gate. Once you reach his door, then submit and cut yourself off from understanding, for in that hour, understanding is harmful, a regular highwayman. So, Ellie's little inquiry brought her to an intellectual understanding. I say, I am life. And Ellie, your intellect robbed you. Is why you're not enlightened. It stopped you right at when you got to the gate, and it stopped you dead cold. And of course, this isn't just Ellie, and I'm not picking on Ellie, because for most of us, it's very hard to get that intellect, that poor intellect, to shut up, especially when it's faced with a problem, because that's what it's hired to do. It's hired to solve problems. So you need your checkbook balance, bring on the intellect. You need to make a shopping list, bring on the intellect. You need to fly to the moon, bring on lots of intellects, the slide rules and the laws of physics and measuring instruments and stuff. We'll build you a rocket ship. We'll take you to the moon and back. It's fantastic. The intellect's amazing at what it can do. But what it cannot do is answer those deep spiritual questions like, who am I? What's my true nature? So the intellect will keep working. When you ask that question, who am I, or whatever, it'll keep going. But the trick is not to settle for anything the intellect says. Keep going beyond that. And there's always, I'm going to try to show you, there's always a way to just keep that inquiry going. So it's interesting because a lot of teachings in the traditions seem to give intellectual answers to the question. And a lot of people, when they start reading spiritual teachings, mystical teachings, they come up with these great teachings that seem to be answers somehow. And then often they kind of understand it intellectually, but they puzzle, why hasn't this really changed my life? Why am I still suffering if I understand it? So one of the great examples of this from the Hindu tradition, the answer to the question, who am I, is Tat Vatsami. I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, but that's Sanskrit, and it means that thou art. The that is Brahman, the ultimate reality, and the thou is Atman, which is your true self, not your ego self, but there's something about you, your true nature, your true self. So there's this equation, that thou art. You are the ultimate reality. Now, this is the way the Hindus put it, but it's certainly not just a Hindu teaching. You find it in all mystical traditions. You could say this is the heart of mystical traditions in a certain sense. Here's a couple of examples. Here's the 8th century Zen Buddhist Wei Ning, and here's what he says of Buddha nature, which Buddha is the ultimate reality. He says, our very self-nature is the Buddha, and apart from this nature, there's no other Buddha. So, that thou art, you are Buddha. And here's the 14th century Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, and he's talking about God. God's the ultimate reality in Christianity. Some simple people think that they will see God as if he were standing there and they hear. It's not so. God and I, we are one. That thou art. Same exact teaching, see? So, this is not really a final answer, that thou art. It's actually an invitation, as all teachings are. It's an invitation to practice, to inquire, to dig into that, to come to your own realization of that truth. Not to take somebody else's word for it, not just because it was written in the Upanishads, which is actually the original where that thou art came from, just marvelous, holy, sacred book. But you have to know it for yourself. That otherwise, it doesn't do any good. I mean, you could pass a test in comparative religion or something, but it's not going to relieve your suffering at all. So, the statement that thou art then actually opens us up to two lines of inquiry. One is, what is that? What is the ultimate reality? And the other is, who is the thou? Who am I? So let's start with the first one. What is the that? And how can you realize what that is with the ultimate reality, God? How can you realize that for yourself? Well, the Christians recommend the best way to go about it from the path of inquiry. There's also the path of devotion, but for inquiry, what they call the via negativa, the way of negation. And here's how the anonymous medieval author of The Cloud of Unknowing explains it. For however much a man may know about every created thing, his intellect will never be able to comprehend the uncreated spiritual truth, which is God. But there is a negative knowledge which does understand God. It proceeds by asserting everything it knows, this is not God, until finally he comes to a point where knowledge is exhausted. And at that point, when knowledge is exhausted, that's when you enter the cloud of unknowing, as the title indicates. That's where you find God. So it's not through piling up more and more intellectual knowledge. It's actually the opposite of that. It's stripping away what you think you know. Okay, you think you know God is infinite. Well, what is infinity? A couple of Sundays ago, Tom gave a wonderful talk about infinity, and actually mathematicians can say a lot more about infinity than you think they could say. But ultimately, we can't grasp infinity. You can't grasp God's infinite. It's not something you actually can put into a box and set it down on your shelf and say, that's God. That's the nature of infinity. It's boundless, endless. Maybe you heard God is love. And it's certainly at a certain realization that is true. But normally when we say God is love, love means it's a sort of a feeling. But feelings are ephemeral. fleeting. So God's not ephemeral. So you have love one day, you're not so loving the next day. That's not God. Okay, so God is life. But life comes and goes. God doesn't come and go. So you can go through a process like this, and whatever you think is God, and whatever you've come to a conclusion about this, examine it, look at it, use your intellect to look at it and see, no, it can't be that. It can't be that. The 13th century Ibn Arabi, the great Sufi sheikh, recommends doing a whole retreat on this one procedure of negation. In Islam, the retreats are traditionally 40 days. You go 40 days just focusing on this one thing. And here I'm going to read you a little of what he recommends for this retreat. When you enter the retreat, he says there are 2 covenants you should make. So the first one is, let your covenant at your entry into retreat be that there is nothing like unto God. Now that's a teaching from the Quran. There's nothing like unto God. So it's like a that thou art teaching. He's taking this teaching. You start with that teaching, but what does that really mean? How are we gonna find that out experientially? So enter the retreat and take this saying: there nothing is like unto God. And to each form that appears to you in retreat and says, I am God, say, far exalted be God above that. You are through God. Remember the form of what you saw, but then turn your attention from it and occupy yourself with zikr continually. Zikr is a form of Sufi mantra. It's repeating some word, some phrase over and over and over. It's a form of concentration practice. So for Sufis, a common one is La ilaha illallah. There are no gods but God. So you just say that over and over. Ibn Arabi actually elsewhere says that you can just say Allah, 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 and nothing but Allah. And it doesn't even have to be a Islamic zikr. You could do a mantra, you could do Om, you could just pick one of your own, just God, 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 over and over. Some form of concentration. You could even do this retreat with just your breath. But if you want some form of concentration so your mind doesn't get wrapped up in stories and everything else. So you're on a 40-day retreat. Now, if you're on a 40-day retreat, lots is going to happen to you. Believe me. And by halfway in and so forth, you're going to have all kinds of experiences, bliss and insights and everything like that. So keep that in mind. He's not just talking about ordinary things, but he is talking about ordinary things. But now he goes on to say, that was one covenant. The second one is that you will not seek from him in retreat anything other than himself, and that you will not attach your himma, that's the power of the heart's intention, to anything other than him. And if everything in the universe should be spread before you, receive it graciously, but do not stop there. Persist in your quest, for he is testing you. If you stay with what is offered, he will escape you. But if you attain him, nothing will escape you. That's so beautifully put. You see, the whole attitude here is not pushing stuff away. This is all an offering. All the stuff you're going to experience on the retreat, receive it graciously. If you have great bliss, receive it graciously. If you have great insights, receive them graciously. But don't stop. Don't stop. And it's being offered here. Here's a little candy. You want that? Oh, here's an ice cream fudge sundae. Oh, that's really good. No. Just him. What is the source? What is the heart of all this? Keep going. So we're in this pandemic, and a lot of us are not in total lockdown, at least spending a lot of time at home and so forth. So I advise you, make use of this time, and instead of running to check out the news every hour to see what's happening next, the great soap opera that's unfolding, plan a retreat. Maybe not 40 days, but if you did a week, whatever, it'd be very valuable. So it's a wonderful opportunity. And I've got an hour talk online at the CSS website on the retreat. If you want a little guidance of how you could do a solo retreat at home, you go to the under publications on the black banner, and then you drill down there and you get to audio online, and you go there, and then in the very first thing is, I think, foundational teachings or something. Just read down through that. I don't know, halfway down or somewhere. The Retreat. It's the CD number 109, so you can find it if you want to find it. So the second line of inquiry begins with that thou art, is the question, well, who am I then? Who is the thou being referred to? If it's in the first person, it's me. So again, this common teaching in all the traditions. Here's how the Sufis put it. They're quoting a saying of the Prophet. Wait a minute, I'm getting a message here. What is that what was that about, Tom?
That's the link to the audio you just referenced.
Oh, okay.
So it was sent to everyone, so they can just click on that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. God, you're right on top of it. We didn't talk about this beforehand. I didn't want to give them a lot of stuff to do for the meeting, but anyway, here we go. So here's how the Sufis put it. They're quoting a saying from the Prophet. Whoso knoweth himself knoweth his Lord. So the same thing. If you know yourself, you know God. That thou art. And here's the great 20th century Hindu mystic Anandamoy Ma. And she says, it is by seeking to know oneself that the great mother of all may be found. That thou art. You find out who you are. You find out who's the great mother of all, the source of everything. So, and just like with the inquiry about what is that, what is the ultimate reality, who am I, proceeds by a negation. So, and the Hindus call this practice neti neti, not this, not that. So in Indian psychology, spiritual psychology, they conceive of the ultimate, the Atman, the true self, as being hidden and wrapped up in these false coverings that we identify with, the body, the mind, the thoughts, and stuff like that. So to get down to the true self, you peel away these outer coverings. So here's how the great 8th century Hindu sage Chakra explains it. Wrapped in the 5 coverings, physical body, instincts, emotion, thought, and subtle energy, which are the products of its own Maya, its own illusion, the Atman remains hidden. A man must separate this Atman from every object of experience, as a stalk of grass is separated from its enveloping sheaths. So you go through this practice. Westerners, you don't have to learn about the sheaths, the coverings as it's defined in the Hindu cosmology. We have our own terms for it. Most Westerners identify with their physical body, their thoughts, their emotions, and then some agent of self-will. I'm somebody who makes up my own mind, decides things. So you can go through this and make a contemplative inquiry, and you sit down and you examine, you see what is actually going on. I'm my body. Well, if you watch your body, you'll see your body is made up of various sensations and things that come and go. Sounds and gurglings and sneezings and voice, and these are all coming and going. So, but the one who's observing all this, the awareness, the consciousness, it's not coming and going. Well, so I can't be this body. It's not even really a body, one single body there. It's all this composite of stuff. And then you watch your thoughts. We do this all the time when you do meditation. Those thoughts come and go. Yakety, 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 yak. But who am I? Which one of the thoughts am I? I'm not any particular one thought. And then your emotions, like we love. Some days you feel love. Some days in one day you go from all kinds of little emotions, a desire, aversion for this. I want that. I don't want that. That. So which one of those are you? And then there are ways you just self-will. That's one of the most interesting ones. Who is really making up the mind here? How does a decision actually happen? So you set up situations like going to a restaurant where you're forced to make a decision, and then you take that as a practice, a contemplative practice. You watch how that happens. And you won't find, I think if you're like me, you won't find any decider in there. Decisions are certainly made, but who's deciding them? Anyway, you can go through this process and you can see how it works. In fact, I, again, did a 9-day retreat on inquiry a number of years ago. And it's also, there are 8 talks from this retreat on our website under same thing, the publications and audio online. This one's under, you have to drill down a little farther under aspects of practice. And right under there, you'll see 8, says inquiry, and then each one has a different little title. There are 8 talks, each about an hour. You can make a retreat out of that if you want to. We go through this very systematically then. So that's another thing you can do under this, in this isolated situation we're facing. The 20th century mystic Ramana Maharshi gives a streamlined version of this inquiry. And this is not a shortcut. He starts off actually his teachings going through the traditional Indian version of neti neti. I am not the body. I am not the this and this and this. And it's very important to do that because, you know, that it's conditioned for us to identify with these things. It's not something we just sort of choose to do. It's not just an intellectual exercise. So if you go through experientially, empirically, and watch this, then that's what convinces you I really can't be this stuff. So that really makes the question interesting. Well, then who really am I? Who's the observer of it? Who's the consciousness? What's going on here? But if you get to that point, then this is very powerful. It's actually Ramana Maharshi's central practice that he recommends. And here's what he says. When thoughts arise, one should not pursue them, but should inquire, to whom did they arise? So he says, don't pursue them. Don't follow them up with another thought, and get caught up in a whole circle of thoughts, a whole chain of a story or whatever. As the thought arises, okay, so who's thinking this thought? Who's observing this thought? To whom did they arise? It does not matter how many thoughts arise. As each thought arises, one should inquire with diligence, to whom has this thought arisen? The answer that would emerge would be to me, whereupon one inquires, well, who am I? And the mind will go back to its source, and the thought that arose will become quiescent. So the idea is whatever thought arises, let's say, so to whom did this arise? And if the answer comes, well, to me, which is sort of an obvious answer, then you inquire, who am I? Where eventually you just cut through and start saying, who am I? Now, here's the big trick though. It's not like we're waiting for the mind to come up with an answer. You let the thought to who am I arise, and then you let that dissolve. That becomes quiescent. That disappears. And what you're left with is just the source, the awareness. So you're following these thoughts. They arise and they come back. You know, it's like watching dolphins. You know, ever seen a school of dolphins coming out of the ocean? And each one rises out of the ocean and takes you back to the ocean. It's like pointing. Each one is showing you, oh, this is it. This is it. Just follow me. But don't get distracted by all the other dolphins. Try to get your mind focused on the source. Then he goes on. He says, with repeated practice, in this manner, the mind will develop the skill to stay in its source. Thus, when the mind stays in its source, all thoughts would go, and the self, which ever exists, will shine. So eventually the thoughts, it's not that they all necessarily completely disappear. They don't bother, they don't distract you. You're focused on that source. You're resting in that source, in that consciousness. And then this part is grace, see? That self will shine. Suddenly it'll break through. Suddenly you'll have this realization. It won't be a thought, oh, I'm awareness. If that thought, I am awareness, arises, well, that's just another thought. So you watch that. Oh, I am awareness. Well, to whom did this thought occur? See, this is what I mean. This is why I said to Ellie early, don't stop with I am life. Well, to whom did that thought arise? Any thought that arises, to whom did that arise? Let it take you back to the source. Let it take you back to the source. That's how you avoid getting stuck. That's how you avoid getting trapped in just an intellectual answer. Okay? So I thought we would try this morning, actually, and this go through the little meditation, doing his practice, and then afterwards we can talk about it and see what happens. So let's all get into our posture. I'm going to give you some reminders as we're going, but here's the basic instruction before we start going. Start with your breath, just to calm the mind down, focusing on the breath, and then start noticing the thoughts that arise. You won't have to generate them, I guarantee it. If no thoughts arise, that's wonderful. Just stay there. But they will arise, almost 100% guaranteed. And then just start doing the practice. Well, to whom did this thought arise? And if the answer comes, well, to me, then just ask, well, who am I? Who am I? Let's be completely present with that thought. You're not trying to push anything away. You have to be completely present because you have to see it arise and dissolve. If you're trying to turn away from you, you'll miss it. That's the finger. It's like, I'm pointing at the moon and you're looking over here. I don't want to see that finger. No, follow the finger to the moon. Okay, follow the thought. Okay. It's important now not to try to do this with every single thought that comes along. You'll go crazy. So just sit back, relax, and the prominent thoughts that come, a bunch of thoughts come, but a strong thought comes up. Oh, okay, that's a juicy one because that'll get your attention. We want your attention to concentrate on it. And then, okay. And then the more you do this, see the more you can find that source, the more your attention goes there, the more try to just you can't force it. If you force it, you ruin everything. You relax into it. You let your attention rest on that consciousness, rest in that consciousness. I should really say it's not an object, in that awareness. Become aware of awareness. It's a very relaxed meditation, actually. Just the trick is not to get all distracted and wrapped up in stories and all. That's the difficult part, is what not to do. The actual meditation doesn't require any effort. It's effortless. Okay? So, here we go. I got my little gong striker. And, everybody ready here? Okay. So let's then spend a few minutes focusing on our breath, resting attention on our breath. Now expand your attention a little bit so we become aware of whatever thoughts are spontaneously arising. When a strong, juicy thought arises, then you make your inquiry. To whom is this thought arising? You could sharpen it a little bit by saying, from where is this thought arising? And if the thought arises to me, or anything else the intellect cooks up, just ask, well, who am I? And again, watch the thought, who am I, arise and pass. And watch where it goes. back to the source. If your attention gets caught up in a chain of thought, notice that and ask, to whom are these thoughts arising? Right there on the spot. Watch the thought. To whom are these thoughts arising? Itself dissolve back into the source. If your intellectual mind comes up with any sort of conceptual answer about who you are, I am awareness, I am consciousness, I am the source, that's a thought. Allow that thought to arise and dissolve away. If you look to where thoughts dissolve and you don't find anything, that's good. It's not a thing. It's the new thing from which all things come and to which all things return. If you're frustrated because you don't understand, that's good. Leave your understanding behind, as Rumi said. Submit, surrender. It's the cloud of unknowing that we need to enter and relax in it and stop fighting it. Stop resisting. Be careful not to drift. Here comes another thought. Okay. Watch how it arises. Watch the source to which it returns. Let me finish by reading you something. This is a Buddhist version of this practice of inquiry, slightly different. You will notice that just what we've been talking about, this one doesn't focus on like one particular question, and it doesn't even focus on just thoughts. But he emphasizes this is a practice you can do all the time, especially if you do this formally, like, once or twice a day, and then it will naturally, if you get into the habit of it, it will naturally spill over into your ordinary daily life, and you can keep this inquiry going. And here's how he describes it. This is the 18th century Zen master Hakuin. Determined to see into your inherent Buddha nature, you should constantly ask yourself, who is hosting your seeing and your hearing? I love that expression. Who is hosting it? Who's here that's, invited you in to all the sights and sounds and so forth? Who is hosting your seeing and hearing? No matter what you are doing, whether you are walking, standing still, sitting down, or lying down, whether you're active or silent, whether you're in a pleasant circumstances or unpleasant situations. Plunge your spirit into this question. What is it that sees everything here and now? What is it that hears? Questioning like this Pondering like this, wondering what it is, when you keep on wondering continuously, driven by courage and conscience, your effort will naturally become unified and solid, turning to a single mass of wonder pervading the universe. So again, this is entering the cloud of unknowing, entering the state of or maintaining this sense of wonder underneath all that's going on. And as he said, whether you're walking, talking, in company or alone or whatever you're doing, if you can develop and cultivate this sense of unknowing, of wonder underneath it all, and where's this all coming from and where's it all going to, then that becomes a total life practice of inquiry. So I recommend it highly, and I hope that you all profit from it. And until we see you again, peace to you all.